The story begins with men in suits in the alley, beating someone. Our protagonist is badly injured but still has cigarettes in his mouth. Park Kang-T told the men that it hurts so much, but one of the men just told him that he'll give him some time to smoke his last cigarette. So he grabbed his lighter to light up his cigarette while thanking the man very much. The lighter released a fire and he started smoking his cigar. The man told the bald man to send off his brother easily in one shot, to which the bald man agreed. Then the bald man apologized to him, but he just spat out his cigar and told the bald man that he knows they are just doing what they are told to do. He knows that his life has been full of anger and despair, and he is still attached to it. Boxing was everything to him, and he had everything like height, punching power, and star quality. In high school, he was even called a promising prospect in the boxing world. But he couldn't ignore the provocations that came his way because he couldn't control his young blood. He was told that he could never box again and was shut down. He thinks there must have been other ways, and he might have been able to make a comeback because he knows that, at the very least, there was a way to make a living as a boxer. But he also knows that it is useless to regret it now. Still, if he had the chance, even just once more, he wants to do boxing one more time. Suddenly, he heard someone telling him that he was ashamed to be a boxing apprentice like him. But then, someone called him Callie to wake him up and asked if he was dead. Then someone shouted that they didn't care if he died and that they should go, making him wonder who it was. 3 boys were panicky, running away, leaving a young man bleeding on the ground. The young man's eyes were empty, but then they woke up when Park Kang-T's soul entered the young man's body and he sprang up to catch his breath. Then he looked at his shaking hand, wondering what it was, knowing that he definitely died from being stabbed, and who was that body? A few days later, the man told the men that the losers of the match go to the mine, but if they won, they stay there in that August boxing apprentice school. The instructor named Nixar also told them that if they didn't want to go to the mine, they should train like they were going to die and listen carefully to the pairs he was assigning them to now. Then Nixar begins pairing Torres and Meros, Undad and Bizon, Kizzo and Damien, Johnny and Caesar, and lastly, Slit and Callie. Then told them that the pairs called now would have a match in a week. The huge man laughingly replied to Nixar that it was clear, but the skinny man asked their captain if he was telling them to die. He knows that Nixar called the inferiors against the superiors, and he can see Nixar's intention. The mine is a dangerous place where many people still die from accidents or lung disease in the 21st century, and the environment there is even worse, so he knows that he must avoid going to the mine at all costs. Suddenly, Nixar called his name, making him jump in shock, and told him to follow him because he had something to ask him to do separately. One of the superiors asked if Kali was getting special treatment again, and the other superior furiously replied that Kali is a jerk who can't even keep up with training. On the other hand, somewhere else, Nixar told him that he had submitted his name to the owner for discharge. He asked Nixar if it was true, but he was surprised that he was calm. Nixar told him that he was not a boxer, and he had a small build, so the same goes for the mine. He'll die soon, making him think that with a body like his, he'll die in less than a year. Then Nixar told him that he'd recommend to the owner that he be sold to a different master. But he told Nixar that he'd go to the match in a week. Nixar asked him if he is really Callie, because if it was usual, he would have already cried and cried. But he firmly told Nixar that he will definitely become a boxer. Then he confidently glared at Nixar, making Nixar smile, and told him that if that's the case, he wouldn't say anything more, but if he changed his mind, he could come to him any time. Then, he silently walked outside, thinking about Nixar, questioning if he's really Callie. But he knows that he is not because until recently, he was a gangster named Park Kang. Got a second chance as a boy named Callie, which is the opportunity to do boxing again. But he knows that his current body is frail with weak bones and insufficient stamina. His growth spurt is late, and his punches are weak. In addition, it seems that Callie has been subjected to a lot of bullying, and it must have been because of that frail body that it wasn't seen. This makes him wonder why he got a second chance with that body. Suddenly, someone called him from the side, and the superiors were glaring at him, making him realize that it was starting again. Then Slit punched his face and kicked him away while telling him that he has never liked a bastard like him. The fact that the instructor took him in as an exception is also a problem. Then Slit asked him what he was bragging about, his father being a champion, and told him that he should just die because he was just a weak, insignificant bastard. The other man who was looking at him thought he was pathetic, but then they noticed that he was still standing up, making them can't believe it because they know that Callie would have been beaten to a pulp if it was usual. While he was wondering how pathetic the owner of his body must have been, Slit teasingly told him that he only had to look at his face for a week, but he agreed and jokingly told Slit that it was because he was going to be dragged to the mine. This made Slit angry and he launched his fist to punch him again. He was stunned, realizing it was a massive fist, and with his current body, it was impossible to dodge it. He wondered how he could dodge it, but then he was surprised to see the fist slowly approaching him. Seeing it coming, he managed to dodge the punch in time, and he wondered if he had truly dodged it. The man who was observing them was also surprised and wondered what was happening. Slit became even more furious because he had avoided his attack and launched his fist once again. It was clear that he could see the trajectory of the fist, so he dodged the attack once more and skillfully avoided other attacks while getting closer to Slit, as he could also see when the guard was down. Then he punched Slit's chest, making Slit stumble back, and the other superiors were shocked. But Slit grabbed his shirt and aimed for him, angrily calling him a weakling, then launched his fist toward his face, hitting him hard. After this, the superiors walked away with Slit, telling him that nobody liked him being cocky. The man who had been watching them from the start observed for a while and then turned around to leave, leaving him alone on the ground, badly injured. However, he smiled and laughed heartily. He wondered why he hadn't noticed until now that something as important as body weight in boxing was eye-hand coordination and reflexes. The hand-eye coordination that can see every grain of sand that falls and follows its movement, and the reflexes that dodge all the punches. He knew he had a pretty useful corner, and swore that he was not going to the mine because he would win and survive. 20 years ago, there was a rising revolt of the armored gladiators, and it was a challenging situation that even regular troops struggled to cope with. The kingdom, which had barely suppressed the rebellion, later abolished the slave gladiator system, and that's how fighters were born. He found out that in this world, the audience only took pleasure in fights where opponents were destroyed with fists. Moreover, his current body made it easy for him to get injured. A man told him that if he was already exhausted, he could run slowly, but he replied with a cough, insisting that he was fine. He knew that he had to do everything to survive because in that place, lacking strength meant certain death. Moments later, Nixar shouted to them that it was over and they should stop. This left him catching his breath in exhaustion, feeling frustrated, knowing that he could run better when he was drinking alcohol or smoking. On the other hand, Nixar, who observed him, wondered how the kid who always lagged behind was now in the middle of the pack. If Callie had been like this before, they wouldn't have let him go, making Nixar wonder what had happened to Callie. Then Nixar overheard one of the men asking his friend why Callie had run with all his might today after getting beaten up. The friend inquired back if he thought Callie was acting a bit strange after his head got hurt. Nixar asked them what they meant by Callie's head getting hurt, leaving the two men shocked. He inquired further if Callie got beaten by another group, and the men replied that they believed Callie got beaten harder than usual. They thought Callie was dead because he was bleeding from the head, nose, and more. Nixar wondered if it was changing Callie because he felt the specter of death. He knew they needed to wait and see a little longer, so he ordered the men to run 50 more laps, to which they immediately replied yes. In the afternoon, during individual training, Callie noticed that everyone was working hard to avoid going to the mine. He realized he had to work just as hard, but he understood that the training was ineffective. It was impossible for him to inflict significant damage with his current body. He knew he had to aim for a crucial area like the jaw, because a well-placed jaw hit could shake the skull and make opponents fall. He needed to perfect his aim for the jaw. A man asked him what he was doing, and he replied that he was in the middle of training. The man questioned why he wasn't training like the others in their training camp. Callie suggested they train in a different style, similar to what they did in their training camp. The man called him cheeky and reminded him that they had been fighters even before he was born, so there was no value in ignoring the veterans. Callie knew that, in that place, boxing was of the slugger type, much like a heavyweight fight in his world. He used to train with that style, but regular training wouldn't help his current body. The man told him to pick up the log and repeat it again and again, but then someone grabbed the man's shoulder and asked him to wait a minute. Then, Nixar asked Kelly if he was learning it from his father, to which he nodded in agreement. Nixar told him that if that was the case, he could use that style in their training camp, and if it was the champion style of training, there was something to learn from it. Then Nixar told him that he could keep that, and he agreed. Nixar thinks Kaviron is a champion, but he wasn't a boxer, and he wonders if Kaviron teaches Callie any other training methods. He also thinks that Callie must have changed after that day, and now Callie feels different. When the sun was about to set, he leaned against the tree tiredly, realizing that he couldn't handle it because he was weak. Then his stomach growled, making him feel hungry, and he craved something sweet. He noticed something above him and saw that he was leaning against an apple tree. He bit into one of the apples and exclaimed that he felt alive. But then someone asked him what he was doing there, and he was surprised to see a noble lady looking at him. He tried to say something, but he was too nervous. The lady told him that if he didn't have an explanation, he should pick an apple for her and come down because she wanted to eat one too. He immediately climbed down and gave her an apple. She took a bite and praised him, then asked him if he wasn't a slave in the training camp and if he didn't know that it was a noble family garden. She reminded him that if he got caught, he would be punished. Shatteringly, he replied that he really didn't know, knowing that if he got hurt, he couldn't compete. She smiled and introduced herself as Azalea Aegist, and her father was Baron Gadolf Aegist, who is his master. She ordered him to say his name, and he replied that he was Kali. She told him that she'd pretend she didn't see what he was doing today because he gave her that apple, but if he got caught again, she'd swing the whip herself. Then she ordered him to quickly leave that place before the others saw him, to which he thanked her and immediately ran away, thinking that it was a close call. Azalea watched him running away and noticed that he was small and looked weak for a boxing. Then she looked at the apple that Callie gave her and ate it while thinking about his name. The next day, Callie was busy training alone with his hands while the superiors were training using the log on the side. Slit noticed that Callie had changed and was attracting everyone's attention with his unconventional training. He also remembered that last day, Callie even hit him, and he knew that if it continued, it would be the end. This made him furiously throw the log he was carrying and ask one of the superiors if the instructor was supposed to come. The man replied that the master called them, so they left. Slit smiled upon hearing this, thinking that there was no harm in testing the opponents in advance. He told everyone that he had to show them who's the boss. Then Slit was about to grab Callie from behind, thinking he'd start with Callie's annoying face and plan to smash Callie to the ground. However, Callie ducked in time to avoid it. He turned around to face Slit and launched his fist towards Slit's jaw, but he stopped in time and surprisingly apologized to Slit. He explained that he was so focused that he didn't notice him next to him. Worriedly, he asked Slit if he hit his face, and Slit replied no, saying he was fine. He told Slit that it was a relief and that he shouldn't get hurt before the match. Slit shook in fear. He told Slit that he'd go back to what he was doing, but knew that Slit was a troublemaker. He remembered that when they were in the organization, he saw his share of guys like Slit. He swore that those who tried to act tough by making others look weak, he would crush them all. On the other hand, the man was busy training with a log, knowing that it wasn't a coincidence. Then the man walked towards Slit and asked Slit if he was worried because he looked pale. Slit shouted and asked the man what he was talking about. He told the man that he was lucky to have a wimp like Callie as his opponent, so nothing could be better than that. The man told Slit that it was true that Callie had changed because usually Callie would whine and annoy them, and they would beat him up. But lately he saw determination in Callie's eyes, indicating that he wouldn't live like before. So, Slit better not be careless and let his guard down. This made Slit surprised, and he couldn't believe that even Torres was paying attention to Callie. Torres smiled upon seeing Slit's reaction and slammed Slit back, telling him that Callie was still Callie, so he shouldn't worry and should just send that trash to the mine. Slit confidently replied, of course, and said it was what he had to do. Meanwhile, in Gadolf's mansion, a man told Nixar that it seemed like the preparations for the match were going well. Nixar replied that they had even started living in the training facility. Gadolf asked Nixar if Torres was the promising one he mentioned and how Torres was. Nixar replied that Torres had a good balance of strength and agility. He was aggressive and skilled, and he had a good eye, which allowed him to overcome his weaknesses. Torres could even aim for the champion title. Gadolf told Nixar that he was looking forward to it and that there was something he wanted him to do, making Nixar ask Gadolf what it was. Gadolf explained that, as they knew, their training center's reputation had been declining and they had been struggling financially. They had to send half of the slaves to the mines due to a lack of funds, so he wanted to invite commoners as spectators and raise some money. He believed that commoners must have missed watching the boxers fight and would surely enjoy it. Then he asked Nixar if he could show them a match worth watching. Nixar replied that he could, all while thinking that Gadolf was his master, but he considered Gadolf incompetent. Nixar knew that the reason the training center's reputation had fallen in the first place was due to Gadolf August Baron's greed. Gadolf had been running the training center for 15 years, and for the first 5 years, he was able to maintain it with the boxers he inherited from his ancestors. However, for the next 10 years, he forced them to fight too much and they died out. August's territory was barren and had little farmland, so he had been relying on the training center's income to support his family. But now, it was not enough either. Nixar thought about how things might have been different if Gadolf hadn't sent young boxers to the Kingdom boxing tournament 2 years ago. Then he remembered a man who had promised him that he would definitely win. But that man had died, making him frustrated. He thought that if Gadolf hadn't done it, the training center might have had a chance to rise again. Azalea told her father that she wanted to watch the match too, and asked if he could prepare one more seat for her. Gadolf asked her what it was for, and questioned whether she had not said she hated it because it was barbaric. She replied that sometimes she thought barbaric things were okay too. Nixar warned Azalea that it might be too stimulating for her, but she insisted that's stimulating. Gadolf chuckled and told his daughter that she really wanted to see it badly. She was not usually interested in fights like these, but she wanted to see for herself how Kali fought. The day of the match arrived, and Kali entered the place, fixing his hand bandage, thinking that finally the time had come. A moment later, someone raised a hand in the air, and the people cheered loudly. Torres thought it was easy, and the match ended. On the other hand, up top, Nixar and Gadolf were watching. Gadolf told Nixar that it was a great fight and instructed him to train Torres well and make him a champion in just 1 year, to which Nixar agreed. Then the instructor shouted that the next and last fight would be between Slit and Kali. Azalea, who was watching the match, noticed that everyone was tall and muscular, but that kid named Kali was as skinny as a bone. She wondered if Kali thought he could become a fighter with that small body. Nixar told her that for a fighter, physique is an absolute factor because physical strength is directly related to power. However, there is still a way. Slit asked Kali why he didn't just surrender now, as if he fought Slit till the end, he wouldn't have good health anymore. But Kali told Slit that if his ability matched the way he talked, he'd already be a champion. He knows it's not that simple, and he can't find a place to hit Slit. He understands that the most significant challenge is the difference in physique. It won't do any good damage if he hits Slit's torso with his fist, so he needs to target Slit's jaw. To do that, he needs 2 things. Slit launched his fist to punch him, but he dodged it. He thought that first, he needed to make Slit's upper body bend like it was now. He continuously avoided Slit's punches, making the people watching shout at him furiously, telling him not to just run away and calling him a scaredy cat. They asked him what he was doing. Slit thought that by getting provoked by the viewers, he had almost lost all his stamina, but he wondered why Kali was fine. Then Slit launched his fist at him once again, calling him a small bastard. Kali was surprised, but he knew that it was part of his plan. He made Slit keep attacking him, which caused Slit to lose most of his stamina faster than Kali, who was just avoiding the attacks. Second, when Slit would lose his guard, he could strike his jaw, but then Slit grabbed his shoulder and launched his fist at his side. Kali was surprised because it was cheating. Slit's fist hit his side, and a few of his ribs broke. He shouted in pain and fell to the ground. The people cheered for Slit, while Kali wondered if everyone knew Slit was cheating because Slit had grabbed him with all his fingers, not his gloves. The instructor began to count down, and he thought that he never expected this to happen. He wondered what he should do. When the instructor counted down to 3, he pushed himself to stand up. Fortunately, he managed to get to his feet in time, although he wondered if his ribs were broken and how many were affected. However, he knew that wasn't the problem for now. The instructor asked him if he could still continue the fight, and he thought that he had already died once, so he would survive now. Slit told him that he'd regret standing up, but he just glared at Slit, knowing that his ribs were already broken and he couldn't move freely. Then Slit launched his fist toward him again, making him think that it was the worst situation, and now that it had come to this, he would do whatever it took. He met Slit's fist using his head, causing Slit to shout in pain. Slit was surprised, and his hand was hurt too. He launched towards Slit, realizing that he needed to attack him. Slit, angrily, was about to attack him again, but he dodged it and saw that the chance was now his. He punched Slit's jaw with all his might, making Slit stagger back a little. But Slit just smiled at him and asked if he thought only one of his punches would kill him. Suddenly, Slit collapsed and fell to the ground. The instructor began to count him down while the viewers were shocked and confused. When the countdown reached 0 and Slit didn't stand up, the instructor announced that the winner was Callie. The viewers were astonished and asked what was happening, but he was just glad that he was still alive. He swore that he wouldn't let his second chance at life go to waste. A week later, the slave traders arrived and half of the apprentices were sent to the mine. The only exception among the inferior students was him. Now there were only a little over 10 people left in the training ground, so the training center was quiet. Later at August's mansion, Nixar told him that the shackles would be released when he returned to the training center. He looked around because it was his first time coming to August's mansion. Nixar asked him how his body was, and he replied that he was fine. Then he excused himself to ask Nixar why the lady had called him. Nixar replied that she seemed to be interested in him after the last match. A few minutes later in Azalea's room, she greeted him and told him that they were meeting again. Then she ordered Nixar to stay outside for a while, and Nixar, confused, replied, "Okay." After Nixar left, she told him to sit there, but he told her that he was fine. She told him not to refuse as she didn't ask twice. He mentioned that he heard she had called him, and she responded by throwing some fruits at him, telling him that he was a bit impatient and should have some fruits. They began to talk, and he ate the fruits she had given, which made her look at him with a smile. Then she explained that she had called him because she had something to ask him. She inquired if he knew that slaves had no right to refuse. He replied yes, while thinking that Azalea was hard to read. She told him that he was amazing in the last match and did well with his thin arms. She also mentioned his one shot, but her father said it was luck and coincidence. She asked him if it wasn't, making him ponder that she was smart and quick because Slit Sponge was a coincidence, but then he told her that he shook his head, which left her confused as to what he meant by shook. He explained that if they hit the chin accurately with their fists, the head would shake, and the person would lose temporary control of their body. But it only applied when the impact was strong enough. She asked if he aimed and attacked, to which he replied yes. She smiled and praised him, then told him that she looked forward to his future moves, so he should keep winning and become a professional boxer. She also mentioned that if he became a champion, he might become a free person. He looked at his hands and the shackles fall to the ground, and thinks about what it meant to be a free person. The afternoon training session arrived, and Torres was training seriously while thinking about freedom because it was his goal. He swore that he would definitely achieve freedom. When Torres was 14 years old, Nixar told him that he would become strong enough. Otherwise, Nixar wouldn't have brought him from being a farmhand. He also had a natural physique and fighting spirit, so he should work hard to become a champion and a free person. He threw the log on the ground while thinking that he used to dislike guys like Callie who did pathetic things every day without a goal. However, when Callie suddenly changed, beats lit, and survived, he realized that they never know what will happen in the world. Then someone told him that lately Callie was acting up and they should teach him a lesson. Because of cowardly Callie, Slit had to go to the mine. A man named Kijo, with the nickname Mantis, told Torres that they should go beat up Callie. Torres replied that he was done and didn't care anymore. This made Kijo ask if he really didn't care and say that it was boring. Torres thought that if Callie wanted to change himself, he wouldn't bother Callie because he was just. On the other hand, Callie was busy in a corner of the training room alone. He noticed that his ribs were completely healed now. He had started exercising around the time he recovered and had gained some muscle too. Then someone called him and told him that he had come out of the training ground after a long time. He just thought to himself that he had been wondering when they'd show up. Kijo asked him if it was fun to win easily, and he sighingly replied that it would be troublesome if they got hurt. Kijo teasingly told him not to be too scared because he'd go easy on him. However, he corrected Kijo, saying it was troublesome if he got hurt. This made Kijo angry, and he launched his fist to attack him, but he jumped backward in time to avoid it. Kijo tried to punch him again, but he avoided it once more while launching a counterattack, then hit Kijo's jaw. Kijo coughed out blood and slowly fell. He was thinking that Kijo must have thought he won by pure luck. Then he told them in his mind that they were overconfident. With tall height and overwhelming reach, it felt like facing someone with a spear. His long jabs and punches made it nearly impossible to approach. He knew that having a long reach was a significant advantage. But Kijo had a large movement and a bent swing that didn't allow him to take full advantage of the reach. It meant that Kijo was essentially a big punching bag. He understood that he shouldn't give Kijo any breaks and needed to maintain the pressure, so he continued to punch Kijo. However, two more men suddenly appeared behind him, ready to attack. This surprised him, but he managed to avoid their attacks, wondering if the three of them were coming at him. Kijo told him not to get cocky with the punch he had landed by chance. Frustrated, he asked Kijo if he was resorting to numbers because he was at a disadvantage. This enraged Kijo, who tried to punch him, but he skillfully avoided it. Unfortunately, another man kneed him from behind, making him realize that they were willing to gang up on him to maintain their self-esteem. He fell to the ground and looked up at them, recalling that he hadn't been much different from them before. He asked Kijo why he was making a fool of himself in a one-on-one fight, and told him that if he wanted to gang up on someone, he should have done it from the start. Kijo asked Torres why he was on Kali's side, and Torres replied that he didn't take anyone's side. He was simply annoyed by the guy who had been beaten by Kali and was now acting up. Kijo shouted that he hadn't been beaten and had just let his guard down for a moment. Torres challenged Kijo to have a one-on-one fight again, with him as the referee. Kijo confidently accepted, and then he gave Kijo a menacing glare with his sharp eyes, which made Kijo jump in horror, wondering if that kid was Kali. Kijo attacked him, but he easily avoided it and pointed out that it was a slow punch, finding it strange that Kijo couldn't dodge it. He continued to punch Kijo's side, and Kijo raised his fist to attack him again, telling him to shut up. Once more, he easily avoided Kijo's punches and told Kijo that he was wasting movements as well. Then he launched his fist toward Kijo's face, saying that Kijo was only showing his weakness. He punched Kijo's jaw, making Kijo dizzy, and he collapsed to the ground face first. Torres noticed that Kali looked like an experienced boxer. He knew that Kali's father was a champion, so Kali must have some talent. Kali called Torres, but Torres told him that they had nothing to do with each other. Still, Kali asked Torres if he didn't hate him and why he helped him. Torres just turned around, asking him if he had to explain that to someone like him, and told him to just get lost.